So today I'm joined by Paula Kennedy Garcia, who actually lives 5 minutes from my house. So it's very rare I get to speak to someone in person in this industry who's so close. Brilliant conversation with Paula, covering everything from employee well-being, emotional experience, to automation and chatbots, to business process outsourcing, and where that's going. Paula's very much into innovation within organizations and some really salient points around how to have innovation without necessarily having to deep dive into the tech. Our default, I think, and particularly in a vendor community, is when we think innovation, we think tech. So about how to actually explore that within an organization, within a BPO, without getting into that almost rapid wiring of the tech. So great listen. Paula has many years experience. She refused to tell me how long it was, but she certainly looks and sounds a lot younger than I, who's been in this industry as well. But it's a great listen. Hopefully you enjoy it. Paula Kennedy Garcia, nice to meet you.
Nice to
Thank
meet
you
you.
very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Syndeo Podcast. This is a first for us. It's actually the first one we're doing live in person, so hopefully it all goes nice and smoothly. I'm sure it will.
Perfect guest.
Normally we're remote and on Zoom in some part of the world, but
So theoretically nothing can go wrong today.
Theoretically,
There we go.
But it's not very often we get someone who's local to us here in Belfast, in Northern Ireland, that's been in the CX BPO space for. You did tell me not to age you earlier.
Don't age me, but I'm going to have to give it up. Like, it's over 25 years, a long time. So I've seen every transformation and change through that industry over those times. So it's been a really interesting career.
Delighted that you're going to come and share some of that thought and insight with us and our listeners today. So just give me a little bit of your snapshot then, background. I know you've been, as you say, in the CX BPO space for a period of time.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really complex industry that sometimes if you're not in the industry, you don't get the real feel about how many opportunities and how diverse it truly is. So I have worked over that course of time deep in operations and running contact centres. I've moved out into building strategy around account management practices and how to help clients grow organically, understand what solutions they need, work in new business development. And in the more recent years, I guess it was probably a lateral shift out into innovation, where there's, to me, a very inextricable link between building new solutions and what's coming next and what's around the corner with technology, so that you're constantly on that front edge of what is emerging, so that clients have the best opportunity to plan roadmaps ahead. And that's been super interesting because it takes me across a diverse spectrum, from contact center management to digital mental health to neuroscience to trust and safety. I mean, so many things have happened in the last few years. It's really, really exciting.
And obviously, well, not obviously, but from the tech, which is largely my background, vendor community, there's been a lot of hype in the last couple of years. And on the way in here this morning, we were obviously chatting about a few things.
Yeah.
And one of the things that struck me, you talked about, we were talking about innovation. And what you said, which never struck me before, being a techie then, not surprising. As soon as anyone mentions innovation, the default assumption is that's technology and that's where it starts to fit.
Yeah.
But innovation is much more so than technology. Do you want just give me a little bit of that?
It's a big word. It's a really big word that can mean different things. I think right now it's interesting. I've seen certainly in the last 6-8 months, innovation really is being bucketed back into technology, because guess what? We're talking about everything around artificial intelligence and generative AI, so it feels like a technical conversation. I'm a non-technologist innovator. If that's a thing, I'm making it a thing, that's a thing. So I come from innovation from a perspective of the client. So it's always customer first, client first. What are the end outcomes that you want to achieve? And that's enabled by technology. And I'll surround myself with really great people like you, Oliver, who know technology inside out, but that's not what I bring to the table. So I guess I'm kind of connecting the dots by saying, what does that mean? What will it do? And what will those outcomes be? As opposed to the mechanics of what you plug and do and code in order to make it happen. So it depends on the lens that you look at. I still very much see that to be in an innovation space, because we are creating something new and we're taking clients on a journey to do their business in a different way. But then it does require technologists, of course, in order to enable that and make it happen.
And give me some of the, I guess, pitfalls. So again, as I said, my default would be, and I guess, regardless of whether it's in a BPO space or an enterprise space, you talk about innovation, and you say you're almost exclusively pigeonholed into the technology space, which is, it's true to a degree, but if you don't open it beyond that, So what are the, I mean, you've seen into, larger organizations as well. Where do you see that kind of going wrong, or the pitfall to, if that's the kind of default? And maybe it isn't, but I assume it is.
No,
kind of the automatic choices.
I think there are pitfalls. Well, the pitfall for you is I'm the person who says that technology can do absolutely everything. So what do you need it to be? So that can be difficult. You have to still be realistic in terms of the guardrails of what things can do. But I guess coming from the customer, the CX background, technology is important and works if it does something that makes experience better. So you have to really understand that journey and that customer experience. And maybe not every technologist, every CTO or development team are as close to customers as what maybe I might be, or teams like me who are very close to the operational side, who deal with clients on a day-to-day basis. Not always necessarily the clients who have the budget for decision, but maybe the guys who are on the ground. So that group of people is very diverse. So I think the pitfall can be you build and design and implement technology because it's a thing. I've worked in organizations where we talked about this, that they come and they say, what's the new stuff? What's new? Because you're innovating. What's the cool stuff I can talk to clients? And I'm going, wrong conversation. What are your business problems? What are the challenges? Where do you want to be? What is the strategy? And how can we help that with technology? And there is a myriad of things that can be done. Right now, everybody's on the race for generative AI. But there's lots of other things which may be what they really need and not generative AI. And that just comes through education and understanding. Because people, if they're not in technology, can be afraid of technology. So you need to talk about it in a different way. And I guess that's where I come in, connecting those dots and having a different type of conversation.
And do you think, obviously there is a lot of hype at the moment, and has been for almost 24 months now, or maybe longer, around Gen AI. And do you think that is confusing people within organizations? Is there clarity, or are we just creating more from the vendor side a big hype bubble that's going to ultimately burst over a lot of us?
I think there's merit in the hype on generative AI. We can't ignore the fact that it is pretty game-changing technology, but it's a part of a bigger artificial intelligence. I think for anybody who maybe is not as close to technology space, that's the bit that they may get confused with or not understand, as in machine learning, natural language processing. All of that has been around for quite a long time, and we've already been using it and implementing it across contact centers and beyond. The generative AI component is the new kid on the block, per se. And because there has been so much noise around, I don't want to say the negative impacts, but certainly the hype impacts about what that means. Oh my goodness, it'll automate everything. We won't need people. There will be no jobs. There'll be no contact centers. For a good, 6 to 12 months from that, it feels like just forever ago, but it's actually been quite
not that long ago.
But when that kind of all emerged, that was a lot of concern, maybe rightfully so. But now things are settling. There's more understanding. There's a little bit of build and design going on. The product itself, things like ChatGPT, sure, they're racing ahead, and the capabilities are phenomenal, what they can achieve. But I've always said that I think the technology, to a degree, is moving much faster than maybe what buying and implementation is. And there's something in that to say, well, hang on, is that a case of caution? Is it a case of true need? Or is it a case also of education to understand? And I like that it isn't racing ahead on the buyer side and client side all of the time, because if it is, you're back to sticking in stuff.
Widgets.
Yeah, widgets and sticking in stuff. And we've had many years of field digital transformation that didn't deliver on big promises. From the early days of things like IVRs and CRMs and static bots. And so we don't want to go down that same pathway of having failure and having the stigma behind what new technology can do, because I think the intelligence and the speed of learning of this kind of new AI era that we're in is really special, and it can make great changes, but we can lean into it in order to make, certainly my industry, the BPO industry, to make it better, even more efficient, to move away from a dependency of labour arbitrage and come into tech arbitrage and really build better efficiencies, which should have better end outcomes for the clients who use it, but always with that customer or the employee in mind as the core person that you're designing for.
And you've seen this in firsthand in terms of that. You mentioned their displacement of agents or bums on seats. How much of that do you think has happened? How much of it is hype, and how much of it is likely to happen? If you had a crystal ball and you're glazing.
Listen, I think there's an absolute likelihood of a portion of displacement, but there's a lot of different variables that are in motion, and so you have to unpick it a little bit to say, well, the chicken and egg, which came first? Like we saw softening of volumes in the CX environment over the last number of years following COVID. There were changes, there were rises and then decreases. Recession, cost of living, people spending less, certain markets get lower, there's been reductions, and then of course technology will make things more efficient. So there's lots of different things that cause that change to happen. But I think sometimes you can look back on new innovations in technology, these big black swan events, the big game changers, and sometimes they also can pivot off growth.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a bit of a believer of, if my technology can create new capacity, if I can make my workforce more efficient, well, I'd rather look at it through a lens of it increasing more capacity to do more. Now, maybe that more is simply gaining wallet share as a vendor and growing my business, that's fair. But it can also be more about, well, as a brand, what could you never previously afford to do? What would you love to do for your customers to truly differentiate? And now how do we release that capacity to do something with that? And that might be a tech solution or a people solution. But I think we're in a period where we can really think richly about the customer experience and doing it differently. I do believe that net there will be, you know, a reduction in demand as a result of that technology. But I don't think we're at the stage of panic. There will be no jobs and no contact centres. And if you look at the industry I'm in, there's a lot of consolidation happening. There's growth, there's ambition. And there's still an awful lot of activity that is still in-house with brands and clients. So there's plenty of opportunity for growth as well.
I mean, just picking up, and I think it was IKEA about 12 months ago, we're talking about how they were repurposing co-workers, as they call them, or agents, because they use technology and automation to reduce the requirement for the number of co-workers, but rather than reducing headcount, what they had started to do was retrain those co-workers to be actually sales agents to help in kitchen planning activity, for example. Do you see much of that going on, or is that a kind of like an outlier, what IKEA are doing or trying to do, but you know, that sort of repurposing of people and changing their job roles?
I think it's a smart move, and I think leaders and organisations need to be thinking ahead. I did a TED talk at the start of the year actually up at Stormont, and part of that was in my talk. It was about, you know, don't wait until the horse is bolted. Think ahead about what do you want your company to be in the future, in the next 5 to 10 years? What will it be as a result of all of the socioeconomic things that are going on around you, and what do workforces need to look like? Because we're in an aging workforce community, so you have to care for the skill set of the older people that work for you, as well as cater to the needs of the next generation, which sometimes can be a little bit in conflict. So that reskilling is really essential. Otherwise, we are creating a significantly large problem of people who won't have work and won't have income, and that changes society significantly at scale all around the world. So I think IKEA is a really nice example where they have thought out of the box and done that, and they had needs in their business to do it. Amazon have done it in advance. Other organizations have done it in advance. I guess in my environment, it's that difference between, you know, accept the fact that high volume repetitive task, they're very susceptible and vulnerable for automation. High likelihood that is what will get tackled with some of the new technology when the time is right for any individual brand. But elevate up your workforce to handle more complex queries. There's still a need for a human need to elevate that. So, but again, enable that through technology, better knowledge bases, getting information in front of screens for agents in a new way so they can do a more complex call. And I think we talk a lot about that role of EQ, that empathy that's needed. What will the boundary be? You know, will there be a boundary? Will the machines be able to become highly empathetic and deal with all of this? But, you know, we lose some of those skills. The more automated we've become over the last years, we need to almost rehumanize the technology as well as the agent to elevate those skills. So I think the time is now to be planning for that, because that's quite a bit of investment. That's people off the job, getting retrained, investing in them, creating a new job, probably increased salaries. So there's investment needed on that too. So organizations need to be sure they have the budgets for that.
Yeah, but I mean, and if we drill down into that, you know, the automation of those highly repetitive tasks, invariably the jobs that the individual doing those jobs, they're not obviously a highly stimulating job, and therefore the amount of churn in another contact center parlance is quite high. Your training costs are quite high to bring in. So there has to be some sort of a ROI around moving those individuals away if you are prepared to invest into getting them into training in other areas of the business. And do you actually see there is, and I know we mentioned a couple of examples there, because it kind of moves over then technology, yes, we've always thought about it from a CX, but if you talk about it from an EX, an employee experience perspective, where technology is starting to help not only in the training, but to help employees, contact center agents, whoever they are, to have a more fulfilled, and therefore, obviously, the better they are at their job, by definition, in theory, the better the experiences you offer your end customers. So do you see much of that? Or where do you see the blockers there in that EX space and how technology can help?
Yeah, I mean, it's complex because, you know, you can run with the assumption that basic jobs have basic people with basic skills. They don't. People are very adept at doing what you need them to do, but if we only ask someone to do a very basic job, then that's what they'll deliver, and it can be monotonous, and maybe it does drive attrition. There's so much more to the role of people who do those jobs that come actually back into the deeper culture of an organization. So I think cultural design and what you are, and you know, that especially with the new generation has gone way beyond a ping pong table and a fruit bowl and doing yoga, you know, the things that we thought were a little bit cool. There's so much more detailed things that people want from their work, and it's about flexibility and work-life balance and all of those things. So you can't take your eye away from those people factors. We know that there is a rising crisis of mental health, especially in the younger generations. So again, when you spend 8 hours of your day at work, then the role that mental health and handling that, and that can be helped along by digital and technology as well. So there's lots of opportunities to do things in a much more engaging and immersive way than maybe there were a few years ago. But we also have to take responsibility. You've got to take responsibility, Oliver. We have built technology prior to this new hype and kind of more intelligent tech. We've built technology in this space over the years, and we've almost created monotony.
Yes.
You know, we've said transformation means an IVR, press 1, press 2. Transformation means a script. Read the script verbatim, get it done. If you don't get it done and your contact gets QA'd, you're penalised because you didn't read that word for word.
Yeah.
So we're forcing people into this monotonous factory-chain approach of doing a job. And so that's the piece that I think the opportunity to rehumanize that technology becomes really exciting, to make that more dynamic, so that the work for the human is more dynamic, and it's a win-win for everyone. And hopefully you would see that roll out and outcomes in terms of sustainability and retention within the contact centre.
I agree. I have a philosophy. I've done very little about it. I'll also confess that, well, it's a philosophy, but I genuinely think, like you, I've been in the contact centre for a long time, probably 25 years. I haven't aged anywhere near as well, Paula, but I have many more grey hairs and wrinkles and whatnot. But the reality is the contact centre, from a tech or even from a business perspective, hasn't evolved since the 70s when we had ACDs and telephony, and it hasn't really evolved, because the basic principle is the same, but at lower cost of employee or a service in front of your most valuable asset, i.e. your customers, producing growth, which to me is a kind of an anathema. So why spend the least in front of your most valuable asset?
That's it.
So if you can change the experience that you're opening up an organization, so that me as a consumer, let's say, or a customer of a product or service, can get access to the right information and the right individual who knows what I want to do as seamlessly and as efficiently as possible, then you won't have a contact center, I believe, of 600 seats or 6,000 seats in 2 buildings that are stacked high and sell them cheap type approach. I think we're a long way from that, but I think that there is technology now that's actually starting to enable that, and I'm not entirely sure what all the blockers are. Is it a mindset thing, or?
I think that it's there's timing and mindset, and also what is right for the contact center. Sometimes it can feel counterintuitive that you want to bring in lots of automation if your business model is having lots of centers and capacity and people, because that's your business model that you're making money from. So, you know, does one counter the other? But what we can't ignore the fact of, whilst, you know, to your point, the technology for many years maybe hasn't advanced to the degree of speed that we see right now, customer expectations have. We all live in a very online, always on digital world. We carry AI around in our pocket and our smartphone all of the time. So that expectation from the customer to have an answer quickly, but it's a resolved answer. It isn't push me through a queue to another person, and not get things answered. So that expectation, it leads into loyalty and brand retention. So the risks are high. You've got to deliver a really, really great service. And we're asking more and more of the people, the humans that do that. So if the tech hasn't evolved, then it falls on the shoulders of the humans to have this massive capacity. That cognitive load is really large. Like training times go from a week to 4 weeks to more. How do you maintain all of that knowledge? How do you get it? So you really need that technology to be helping the human to deal with much more than was ever expected of them. Even if automation didn't come into the mix at all, just getting information to people and helping them help customers is really important in a way that they feel they're helping and that they're not robotic themselves. But yeah, I think that there may be blockers, there may be things automatically that you'd say, well, it's counterintuitive to my business model, but this is inevitably going to happen. And what's exciting for me is seeing the leaders in the industry who've already embraced it. And they're saying, and this is difference between let's race and have it and have the storefront that says, hey, we're experts in AI and we've got all the tools and it's all really cool and it's brilliant. What you want is the expertise behind it. You want the person in your business to come along to you as a client and say, but what do you really need? What are you trying to achieve? And is generative AI the answer for that, or do you need the thing in this box or this box? And to build the right solution, not just throw everything at it because it happens to be the trend du jour.
But do you not think, and you rightly challenge me as a tech vendor for part of the problem we have now, if I open that back up to the BPO world, I mean, the BPO model is very much based on, or has been, the number of people you can sell and the rate you can kind of sell them at. Do you think there's an opportunity there for the BPO providers to actually do it in a different way, to change their model? Is that possible? 100%. Or is there resistance to do that, or what's stopping them doing it?
No, I think we have to debunk a little bit of myth of BPO being the stack them high and push it out. I think those days are long gone. I think the value, and this is one of the areas of concern I have for the industry, because I think we undersell sometimes the absolute expertise that sits within BPO. I mean, think about it. Organizations have outsourced their customer support to a partner, which means they probably have downsized their internal resources. So where do you think who's closest to those customers, and where do you think that expertise is really sitting? From team leaders to operations managers and account managers and solution designers and tech people, there is so much absolute expertise at a brand level that sits within a BPO partner. So use that richness. And I think the closer you get into BPO, certainly those who do think ahead of the curve and have seen some of these changes coming, they have already diversified their business model. It isn't all 100% customer service basic work. There's really complex work that goes in within BPO. I was working in trust and safety for many years. Like, that's complicated. That's deciding what can and can't be on the internet. And now that has expanded even from what used to be just for big tech social media platforms to fraud, preventative fraud, ID verification. There's a lot goes on the payment side. There's a lot that goes on in collections and complaints. The work that sits within BPO is really, really complex. So yes, it has a commercial model that sits behind it. Traditionally, that commercial model might have been hourly based or transactionally based. But as we move into technology that creates outcomes, it opens up the door to have a conversation about outcomes. So commercial deals can change. So we're in this kind of period, I think, where procurement teams who buy are probably in transition to be thinking differently about contracting. Contracting is changing, and the terms about how you'll get and build maybe better long-term partnerships should be a nice outcome of that, because you should be building technology to see results, and then that should remove the previous digital transformation failures that we've seen where some of those results didn't come through.
And how, I suppose there's a big challenge there for BPOs, because to give that level of service, to understand that brand, you ultimately have to live and breathe the brand. And every brand's different by definition, or should be different, otherwise the organization isn't going to really survive very long. So therefore the challenge for the BPO is, how can you replicate that understanding, the intrinsic knowledge of a brand, and do that even if it's across the same industry, because every organization will brand themselves differently, sometimes subtly, sometimes less subtle. So how are the BPOs, I suppose, facing that challenge to become really intrinsic, replacing those internal people who understand the brand, who have the same value proposition, etc.?
Well, one size certainly doesn't fit all. People will do it in different ways. I've been very blessed to work with some really great BPO brands, and I'll tell you my experience, and I've built up client teams that have been very successful, and my experience is about you have dedicated resources. They are not just immersed in your brand, they're immersed in that industry, so they know you, but they know the competitive landscape. they know the direction of where travel is headed. They will come into the business, say, here are the things that we need that maybe are not being cared for, and the business will go off and create those solutions. So you have to be constantly nurturing and speaking and walking the corridors of your client. You're an extension of that brand.
Yeah.
And unless you have that really close symbiosis, then you're just a vendor. So you move away from that vendor model into a true trusted partner. That gets you the seat at the table to be talking about doing things differently. And ideally, those conversations are sitting down and saying, how do I help you do more with less in 2 years' time, in 3 years' time? Not how do I constantly grow. Growth will come if you create that environment of trust and you do those things with your client. But if you're the type of organization that is simply interested in the hourly rate and keeping it as long as possible and stacking it high, that wouldn't be a position I would like to be in right now. I think where we see automation potentially being able to remove that large amount of volume, if I'm one of many vendors, I wouldn't want to be number 3 or number 4 in the stack rank right now. I wouldn't be feeling confident that if there was a decision on who would get the rest of the pie, that it would be me. So I think performance and excellence has to be really, really important. And
do you see, we talked a number of years ago, I don't know if you recall, about gig economies and that, and how do you see that playing into, because again there's a bit of a juxtaposition there between understanding the brand, what a BPO provides, or even the organisation themselves, and then how do you, for want of a better word, outsource that to a gig economy? Maybe explain what the gig economy is in case some of our listeners are not as familiar as you or I maybe
dropped into that. Maybe we built it, I don't know. I worked at Concentrix at the time, who pioneered building out the kind of probably first BPO gig CX model, as we called it. But in its simplest form, it's a freelancer model. It's saying there are people who maybe have a day job but want to do something different, or there's a population of people who don't want to work in a traditional environment and want to work. So it's that Uber mentality of gig economy, about kind of, earning on demand and earning on the go and becoming a freelancer and responsible for your own taxes and all of those kinds of things. So it was quite avant-garde for Concentrix to build that alongside a traditional BPO model as well. But we got really, really great insights. That model has continued across other organizations, independent organizations. I've seen some recently with really great tech that had I been still building out Solve, as we called it, it probably would have been what my next iteration and stuff would have been. So it continues. I think there is a market for it. I think it tends to be mostly next generational people who are involved in that. I think it has a certain space where it works. I don't see it necessarily going away. I think technology might just enable it because it allows you to be more dynamic on the go with, what you see, what you can do. There'll be a certain type of work which is very suitable for gig working, and other types of work that maybe in the future with more technology as automation happens might not. But it's certainly lucrative for people who feel that's an extra way of earning money. And the only thing that really I would have said was the biggest watch out for it was how legislation changes, because sometimes legislation can be the driver of the future of some of these. And if there are a lot of guardrails and legislation put around the flexibility of freelancing and gig economy, then maybe it doesn't differentiate it enough from a traditional model to make it an organization's worth time in terms of deploying that out as a channel strategically. So I think you always have to keep an eye on where legislation goes. And you'll see that across Europe, especially with AI, in that there's a protection layer that's going in country by country to make sure that jobs stay within country and do things. So those are always, I think, the socioeconomic things that you have to monitor as you're looking through some of these more dynamic changes.
You're just picking up on that because there is a lot of, obviously, the AI, and there's the European legislation that's just come online, and the UK are looking at it, the US are looking at it. You've seen it in the gig world. Do you see legislation as two aspects, or many aspects, but certainly one can be seen as stifling innovation? Do you see much of that, or how do you think we get that balance right between not stifling innovation but yet putting the right guardrails and level of protection around it?
Yeah, I mean, straight out of the gate, there was a lot, especially builders and designers in the AI space over the course of the last year, because Europe were one of the first to move on legislation where it was a fear of that. It stifled what we do. We can't, but we also have to take a societal duty of care around safety. And maybe I think about this more because I came from that trust and safety space. I dropped in there and I learned so much just about how damaging an online safety can be if it isn't applied properly. And AI, we do have to be careful. I mean, we look at AI through the very tiny lens of what we might have it in a consumer usage of, and maybe it seems fairly innocent and it's not a problem, but deep fakes are a problem. Mass war is a problem. Misinformation and what that means in terms of medication and climate and everything else is a problem. And so with this exponential growth of intelligence and knowledge, it doesn't take away from the old adage of rubbish in, rubbish out. So my caution always to organizations who are looking at AI moving forward is like, don't feel like the guardrails are stifling you. Just make sure you treat your project as something which is a forever project that you're working on. It's not a point in time. Your data and the quality of that data and what you're putting out is going to be a representation of your brand, and you will have a duty of care to stand over that. And I think as the legalities and contracting and everything changes, people will become maybe a little bit more cautious around what that means. But I do believe that we need guardrails and we need some form of legislation and direction.
And do you think there's a fear there around how do we adopt this technology without, obviously the guardrails are changing from a legislation and are evolving rather than changing. And do you think there's a fear within organisations around going a certain path and that the legislation might then stop that and have turn, about a whole fart almost around, change around on it?
Well, if there is, it's naive. We've already come through lots of legislation which is about consumer rights, GDPR, data protection. So it's not our first rodeo on this, right? So it's just another iteration of that which taps into a new space which is relatively unknown. And that's just good business. Any country leader, any business leader would not want to be going out and doing things which is not right for people. So I think it's naive to think that that isn't something you'll have to do, but it is also naive to overlook the importance of governance and to make sure that governance and data and that your legal teams and your compliance teams are very involved with what you're building, because you're now sitting on data which will influence what people decide to do. And unfortunately, the scale of how the machines learn is so fast that can you get it back? Can you fix it when it goes wrong? So, that we've seen the recent press cases of Air Canada, DPD, where the bots didn't quite say the right thing, and we can laugh, but take that up to a scale of something very serious, not good.
Yeah. Flipping back into the employee EX side of things, because I know one of your areas of focus has always been well-being and I suppose probably, and I'm going to paraphrase and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but using technology to help with that, or has it been more around the people, the process, or a combination of both?
Combination of both. Funny, I grew up through this industry in the poster child of 90s, early 90s, where we're meant to be hardened and push through and keep going and non-stop. And so it was when I got really involved in trust and safety that I actually got really involved in well-being and started to just check myself a bit and say, hang on, things are changing. And I'm really glad that just generally society has changed to have a focus on well-being for people overall. But I'm a curious old soul with technology. Yeah. So, if you're going to do something new, can it be better with something dynamic with tech? There may be times where that's a no. But I had started off doing some work with an incredible firm in the US who were involved with neuroscience. And that neuroscience was kind of looking at the impact of content, good or bad, on the brain. And the AI behind that was actually looking at your oxytocin level and what it looked at content, and it could give you an idea whether you had psychological safety or not. And then I moved on out into the space of all of this plethora of apps and things that there are for well-being. Like there's every man and his dog has an app out there in order to make you feel calmer, to meditate, to do whatever. But very, very few of them are clinically backed. So that got me really curious to say, well, how do you take that kind of neuroscience approach or a clinically led approach into well-being? And can technology tell you things that you don't know? And I believe that it can. I believe that we are also in a state of chaos with health systems around the world, where waiting times are incredible, where people are not getting access to the resources. There's not enough doctors and nurses out there to do the job, and they're probably very underpaid for what they're doing. So we have to find alternatives. And in this modern age, if you can't use technology, again, to co-pilot or partner with them or do things in that way, well, that just seems like a shame. So I've been doing some work in recent years with clinical AI algorithms which listen to conversations and look for identifications of stress and can pull the data and analytics very anonymously and say, There's your pinpoint your problem. That's where it is. I've seen it in the contact center space where I could zone it into a country, to an age group, to a particular work type, and say, well, we've got a big strategy for well-being doing this, but it's not actually answering the call of this group of people who are your most vulnerable, and you can change your strategy. So you don't need to cross any boundaries of data protection and privacy and anonymity. You can do this all by good data, but the data pinpoints you to do the right things to make a better impact for your business.
And this is when you talk about analysing emotion, this internally within the organisation for the employees, not necessarily, or is it both?
Well, interesting you say that. Yes, I mean, what I was testing in was looking at anonymised conversations with employees, but I look now at a lot of the CRM technology that's out there, and the data analytics that's giving a score for everything. So we score the length of contact, we score the sentiment of the customer, whether they were happy, whether they were sad. So that's already happening with a customer conversation. Wouldn't it be amazing if you automatically had a well-being score for how the person handling that contact went? That's the easiest. That's just sentiment in a different way, but it can be clinically designed rather than just out of a box like you would do for a customer sentiment. So that's the easiest thing in the world to do. Wouldn't that be super powerful if now a new metric on everybody's scorecard could say, in the complaints team, people are handling things with this level of resilience versus maybe in a customer service team, or Paula just needs to come off that and do something different. That's all accessible. So there's no excuse for us not to know what's going on with our workforces and helping them.
But surely those things should be intrinsically tied to attrition rates and retraining rates.
They did, and in the testing that I was doing, it had an absolute direct correlation on improved satisfaction, employee satisfaction, customer satisfaction, and improved attendance and attrition. So very early days at early stages, but with scale and with more work, those can tie back. And actually, there's a lot of money being spent on well-being by organisations on the fruit bowls and yoga days, and no measurement to say is it impacting, and no measurement to say actually is that the reason why attendance got worse or better. But now you can get data. You could implement data into your normal working practices that would help you also defend that ROI and take that back up to a C-suite metric.
And what do you feel, or why do you think there's a reticence? I mean, if, as you say, because I agree, we think the technology is here. We can do it. We can do it much more at scale. What is there, or is there a reticence within the organisation to actually try to? Is it just because it can't put an ROI business case against it, or?
I don't want to say it's a reticence just yet, because I think some of these things are so nascent and so emerging that there's maybe an unawareness.
Right.
And like all of the technology, you have a job to do to take the story out and show people what it can do and to overcome some of those objections. If I was hearing it for the first time, I would be worried about things like, well, will I lose my job if my boss finds out that I'm not really good? There's countries where mental health is still a big stigma. Okay, but look at the culture of your company if that's how people are feeling, first of all. There's other things to fix. But what we're talking here is, I keep saying, about putting that needle on top of the haystack. Reticence can come back about saying, well, once I know something, I can't not know it. I can't unsee it. I have to do something about it. Go back to the culture of your company. Yes, you do. But would you rather not know? And again, this doesn't need to be directed at people. This can be trend level. Just like you look at trend level of sentiment about how happy your customers are, you would fix that if your customers were highly unhappy. If it's with an agent, you'll do retraining. If it's in a product, you go back to the product team. So your workforce is in a very similar way, and there are means of doing that now. But the technology goes beyond that. So I think reticence will start to maybe subside a little bit. There's fantastic technology, which is actually Ireland built. There's fantastic technology which is taking the well-being piece right through to the counselling stage. And it is using AI and incredibly evolved algorithms in AI to have deep conversations for counselling right through for people who have significant needs. So this has moved on in great paces. It moves quickly, maybe a little bit under the radar. It's not mainstream, but it will be mainstream. I remember having that conversation 5 years ago about language translation. Trust me, digital well-being in the workplace will be mainstream very soon. It just might not be there yet.
Is language translation mainstream?
Mainstream, yes, it is. I'm a linguist, so I've always been really picky about what needs to be there for multilingual service for customers, and it was always an area of passion of mine. I was growing business across Europe, so it was important. But you come across similar challenges, staffing lines with language in terms of sourcing and training and all of those great things, and technology came through. Now we all know the old days of, I'll not name any of them, but you when you listen to some of the dubbed films, right? Some of them's not good, and being a linguist, you identify that very, very quickly. But the quality of language translation has grown and grown over the years. There are some really great software solutions straight off the shelf that are being used, and it allows brands to now effectively be available 24/7 in the language of the customer, which again, same old thing, rolls into retention, rolls into satisfaction. So yeah, I would say language translation, good language translation, is pretty mainstream.
I have seen some vendors promoting that real time over voice calls. I'm not sure whether it's quite there yet.
It's not, no. There's a growth in it, and I think it will move quite quickly. There's a latency piece
Yes.
that absolutely needs to be addressed. But, you know, it also comes down to what is good enough versus perfection, right? If I'm someone who simply doesn't speak English, but I have a really important call that I have to do, maybe it's a life or death situation, I need to speak to somebody in my language, do I mind a couple of nanoseconds of latency? Probably not. But in an ongoing environment, we want to always achieve that nirvana, that perfection, and that latency piece probably isn't at perfection stage, but the technology is certainly moving in a way that both video and voice calls can be done very, very near real time. I think sometimes we've got to think about, again, coming back into cognitive load for the agent, hearing and doing. You know, they're not trained translators or on the Eurovision Song Contest panel, whatever that might be. It's very, very different, but the technology is moving at pace. So I can see that becoming fairly standard fairly soon.
Yeah, and again, I know we were chatting on the way in. I mean, the challenge, I guess, and it's maybe the vendors doing this more so, is we're constantly promoting the next piece of it, the next iteration of the technology. The challenge for the organization then is knowing which bits to pick given where they're at, but where to start on some of these projects or programs, because sometimes, like I said to you, like it's, you know, take the copper coming out of your network and put in IP, and that'll help you.
We've almost come full circle, I think, because this is why I think it actually is really important strategically for organizations to have an innovation team within their business. My job in that role was to be 2 years ahead. So as everyone is talking about language translation now, I'm kind of going, being there, because I should have been talking about that 3-5 years ago, which I was. So when it's mainstream, your bigger population, you know, we all know about the innovation curve and where it starts to hit into the different populations of people taking it and adopting it and making it scale. So at that point, really, someone who's in an innovation team in a business should be looking at what's next. So, you know, the fact that I was looking at things like neuroscience, where will the metaverse go? What does it mean for immersive experiences across different channels? What's the new omni-channel? Those are where you need your innovation team to be looking at. They need to be looking at those a little bit of moonshot thinking, yes, but also a little bit about how are things changing, because it's our job to be packaging that up in a means that can be understood, and, you know, just really breaking it down into simplest form and storytelling to help customers understand what that looks like. Because any good leader of an organization or relationship with a client has a roadmap. Roadmap never ends, right? You know, so you have to keep updating what comes next. And every time you're changing something, it will have a backward impact on something that has gone before it. So you can't just keep plugging in. That's where we've gone wrong. That's where we've got all these tech systems with big bolt-on bits and pieces, and we're trying to almost simplify that now and start again with it. So you have to have that roadmap on an ongoing basis, and to have it ongoing, you need to have a good 20% of your time looking at blue sky and looking at innovation and see what will make a difference. And not only that, brands and BPOs want to be differentiated. So we're always looking for what's the next big cool thing. But we all kind of all do the same job. So you just, innovation and investing, that's important.
And, you know, when you talk about innovation, and maybe my sense is wrong here, now I'm thinking specifically in the space that we operate in, you know, the customer experience contact center. I feel that organizations have typically outsourced that innovation to a vendor. So we'll get the tech guys in, whoever they are, because they have all the innovation, and then we'll just pick the right piece of innovation, as opposed to the innovation being internal first and foremost, and not just about the tech, but about the organization, and then go and pick the right piece of tech that aligns with it. Is that what you would see?
I don't think you're wrong, but I think I think slightly differently, that conversation with the tech team coming in is a little bit further down the line. I live a lot in the world of what if we could do that? What if this was an outcome? And if that's the outcome we'd like to achieve, how could we deliver against that? So getting a really good concept and a story of what an outcome to make a difference, then that's when you build an initial team around you, which will have tech input, absolutely, to say what is possible. But until it becomes a product, it's probably not client ready.
Yeah, but I suppose the point I mean, do you feel that organisations are actually doing that, taking those steps first? And I suppose, what have you seen, that's working, or I suppose process that works well in that space before you dive into the tech, or you dive into let's go and get 3 vendors to pitch to us? So, how do organisations start to think about that innovation? How do they actually structure it? What does it kind of look like?
Yeah, I mean, it does differ. There's certainly been a shift in the BPO industry in recent years of building out those kind of consulting boutique innovation capabilities within your business. And again, that's where I think maybe it is not totally understood about how evolved BPO has become, because that used to be a big 4. You go to the big 4 to get things like that done, but a lot of that can be done in-house. So there are different ways. There's the whole question over build versus buy, but somebody somewhere has to start with a crazy nugget, right? Is this possible? And then if it's possible, you want to think about, well, who can make it possible? And then you might go out and look at different tech solutions or scale-ups that might be able to be part of that, and then you'll bring it to your tech team, and then you'll do the ROI behind it and see, does it make sense? And then you'll try to build a product. So before you can get into prototyping, there's a bit of discovery and maybe a little bit of dreaming that has to happen too, but that's fun. I don't think every organisation is doing it, but I do think in my industry there are certain BPOs that are doing it and doing it pretty well. There may be fewer rather than all. I think that will start to change, but those are the ones that have been earlier adopters of new tech and new solutions, and I think that's where you see the difference in the makeup of what BPOs are today.
So I'm conscious we're probably running up against usurping a lot of your time this morning, Paula. But
I told you I could talk about all this forever, didn't I?
I suppose maybe try to look forward a little bit for us in the sense of, I don't mean the near term, next year or two, but like 5, 10, what's coming down line, do you think, either innovation wise, and I just don't mean tech wise, that could change the way we approach customer experience, employee experience? What are the things you think of that organizations should be thinking about in 10 or 15 years' time?
I think some of the next stages feel a little bit out there. I mean, metaverse got a bad name very quickly, but I have not discarded metaverse. I think spatial technology generally is going to evolve, and I think that will change the dynamic even further. We will see a much bigger fusion between, Web3 and physical environments. We will see and if that's done between an online and an offline environment, it will inevitably fall over into a support environment. So that when all of that starts to get a little bit more mature, then it's hardware, it's software, it's tools, it's kit. Again, we're back in another cycle of new things that we have to create, because experiences will change. Because once they change on the consumer side, it forces everything else to come along with it. And I think that's what drives behavior right now. The changes are happening at a consumer level, and they happen pretty quickly. So I always smirk a little bit about a lot of the negative comments that you see when the next new Apple product or whatever comes out. Well, it doesn't do all of this. No, it doesn't. But it's like version 1, go back to when the iPhone was released. So I think that kind of more immersive experience for customer experience will just get more and more evolved and very, very exciting. And then who knows where AI will go and how quickly. I mean, look at 4.0. Look at the ability to run images and videos and change and create content. It's half scary, half genius. I don't know where I sit on either of those two things, but it's there and we run with it, so a lot's going to change.
Yeah, no, I have seen, and we're just recording this shortly after OpenAI released their GPT 4.0, and or 4.0, I think it's called, and keep up with the terminology. It is kind of scary how much of it, I'm not doubting, I'm not going to say how much of it's actually true, but when you look at some of those clips of that sort of, as you say, spatial awareness of visuals, of audio, and I'm sure they'll start to build in all the sensories, feelings around it. I think for the first time, when you talked about the metaverse, I did kind of think a couple of years ago, whenever Zuckerberg came out with it, was kind of like totally pie in the sky. But when you look at what's happening, or what, OpenAI have done, now I know it's still really early days, you can actually start to see that leap from the physical to the virtual.
Look at what Gucci, Ferrari, any of the big luxury brands are doing within Roblox and things like that. It's already in place. It's just not mainstream, but growing really, really quick. I always say, look to the movies, watch the box office, because you will be sure that whatever is projected at Movie Land will come true in real life. Happens time and time again.
Well, I don't shop with either Gucci or Ferrari, unfortunately, yet. I will keep an eye on their brands, Paula, going forward. But listen, it's been a fascinating chat. We'll definitely have you back again in the not too distant future, hopefully.
Super.
Thank you very much for joining us today. It's been a blast.
I've loved
and
it.
A very short one.
Okay.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Paula.
you.